So in this first video, we look at really why did we want to explore Mars? Why is there so much fascination in Mars? Why have there been so many missions to Mars? There are 8 planets in our solar system, and of these 8 planets, 5 of them we can actually see with the naked eye. At the right moment in the year, you can go outside and see these 5 planets. They're Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. What sets Mars apart, though, from the other 4 is that it's red. When you look at it, it looks red, whereas the other 4 just look like bright stars. So the fact that we see Mars as being red from Earth is the reason for centuries we've called Mars the red planet. And we've always been fascinated by Mars, and there have been numerous books and movies about people living on Mars, traveling to Mars. In fact, about a century ago, even famous astronomers thought they saw canals and structures on Mars, and they were convinced people or Martians were living on Mars. So if we see Mars as being red from Earth, and even this Hubble picture here shows it as being red, if we were to visit Mars, is it really red? So I'm going to show you a 1-minute video from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA that discusses this question and provides an answer.
Is Mars really red? When you see Mars in the night sky, it definitely has a reddish tint to it. People have been noticing that for a long time. Even the ancient Egyptians called Mars the Red One. So where does that redness come from? Well, a lot of rocks on Mars are full of iron, and when they're exposed to the great outdoors, they oxidize and turn reddish, the same way an old bike left out in the yard gets all rusty. When rusty dust from those rocks gets kicked up in the atmosphere, it makes the Martian sky look pink. From a long way away, the whole planet looks kind of reddish, but if you get a close-up view, with an orbiter, lander, or rover, you'll see that a lot of Mars is actually more of a butterscotch color. Depending on what minerals are around, some landscapes can be more golden, brown, tan, or even a little greenish. So in fact, there are a lot of different colors on what we call the red planet.
So we can see then that we've been interested and fascinated by Mars for centuries. In fact, the name Mars comes from the ancient Romans. It was their king of war. But it wasn't until 1610 that we first saw Mars through a telescope, and it was Galileo that first achieved this. And for decades and centuries afterwards, as telescopes improved, people looked and analysed Mars more and more. And as I mentioned earlier, a famous astronomer, Percival Lowell, in the latter part of the 1800s and early 1900s, looked at Mars and examined it extensively through a telescope. He was convinced there were canals and structures on Mars. He was convinced there were intelligent life forms on Mars. But in fact, as our telescopes have improved and as we've had missions to Mars, we now know there aren't intelligent life forms on Mars. There may be some basic bacteria that has existed in the past or may even exist today, but there are no intelligent life forms on Mars. It's over 50 years ago now that the first spacecraft actually reached Mars, and that was Mariner 4. It didn't land on Mars, but it was able to fly by it and photograph it. And since then, over the last 50 years, there have been numerous missions, orbiters that have circled Mars and taken photographs of it and examined its surfaces. And in fact, NASA has also managed to land on Mars, and there have been Mars rovers there. So I still need to answer the question of why Mars? Why are we so interested in Mars? Why are we sending so many missions there? And one of the main answers to the question is that after Earth, Mars is the most habitable planet in our solar system. So therefore, if you want to leave Earth and live on another planet, Mars provides the best opportunity. But Mars is very different from Earth. For example, an astronaut cannot breathe on Mars because The little atmosphere that there is mainly carbon dioxide. So we really need to understand better what is involved in living on Mars. We need to understand about the planet more, and we need to understand how do we efficiently get to Mars. And that's the reason why there have been so many missions. It's to do this kind of research. And the 3 missions this month that are going to Mars is to continue that research program. So let's first address the question of how do we get to Mars? We've seen all these missions. We've seen that we've landed rovers on Mars. How do we do that? And I'm going to use another video from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA that answers this question.
How do you get to Mars? If you want to send a spacecraft all the way to Mars, first you'll need a fast rocket to escape the pull of Earth's gravity. The heavier your spacecraft, the more powerful your rocket needs to be to lift off. Next, make sure you launch at the right time. Mars and Earth orbit the Sun at different speeds and distances. Sometimes they're really far apart, and other times they come closer together. About every 2 years, the 2 planets are in perfect positions to get to Mars with the least amount of rocket fuel. That's important. The total trip is over 300 million miles. Finally, make sure your aim is right. You can't shoot for where Mars is at launch time. You have to aim for where it will be when you get there. It's a lot like how a quarterback passes a football. Also, you may need a few thrusts to correct your direction along the way so you don't miss Mars. If all goes well, you'll get to the red planet in about 7 or 8 months. Then, if you actually want to land on Mars, well, that's a whole other challenge.
So that video explains how we get to Mars. It also explains why there are 3 missions launching in July. Because as the video said, it takes 6-7 months to get to Mars, and we need to launch so we arrive at Mars when it's closest to Earth. And in fact, it's about next February when Mars is very close to Earth, or closest to Earth, and that's why we're launching in July. If we can't launch in July, we have to wait another 2 years before we can do that. So this is the end of this first video where I've looked at exploring Mars. In our next video, we'll take a detailed look at the Mars 2020 mission that's launching at the end of this month. We'll also take a look at the rover that's a part of that project. So I'd like to thank NASA for providing all the information to me that I can present to you about Mars, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching and listening.